Hello and welcome to Godless Bitches 2.0, a show that aims to raise awareness of civil rights issues, progress, and setbacks from the past and present, as well as a discussion of what we hope will be realized in the future. This show, as well as a bunch of others, are a production of the Atheist Community of Austin. We have a really super special show today. It's this show and then next Saturday's show will be on intersectionality. So where you have an identity and then a second identity, where those overlap is important and needs to be discussed, and how to be a better ally. So, like, for instance, I'm a woman, but for Mandisa, being a black woman is an entirely different thing. And for Serafina, being a trans woman is an entirely different thing. And actually for Jen, being a lesbian is a totally different experience, and so on. So we need to be aware of these things when we talk about them. We have two guests, and I'm going to introduce them, and I'm going to let you all know a little-known secret. Whenever a bio is read about someone, usually the person who wrote it is the person you're introducing. And it's very strange to write something about yourself. But in this case, it's a perfect introduction because it is incredibly Serafina-like. So here is Serafina's bio. Serafina Smith has had 17 years of lived experience as an out trans woman in America, and oh, has it ever been a hell of a ride. Sarah works for a major consumer electronics company in Austin where, among other things, she organizes and directs volunteer opportunities with area charities. She has served twice on the ACA Board of Directors and is a frequent guest and occasional host on the ACA production Secular Sexuality. She's remarkably bad at writing bios, as this short paragraph took her something like a day to throw together. This is Serafina. There she is. And that is so Serafina.
That's all true.
Right? It is. And our other special guest is Mandisa Thomas. She's been on the show before, so you may remember her. She is a native of New York City, is the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated. Mandisa has a number of media appearances to her credit, including CBS Sunday Morning, CNN.com, and Playboy, The Humanist, and Jet magazines. She has been a guest on podcasts such as The Humanist Hour and Ask an Atheist, as well as the documentaries Contradiction and My Week in Atheism. She's freaking everywhere. Mandisa currently serves on the boards of American Atheists and the Reason Rally Coalition, and previously for Foundation Beyond Belief and the Secular Coalition for America. She also is an active speaker and has presented at conferences, conventions for Freedom from Religion Foundation, Secular Student Alliance, and many others. Mandisa was named the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association's 2018 Person of the Year, and was also named the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Free Thought Heroine for 2019. As the president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated, Mandisa works to encourage more blacks to come out and stand strong with their nonbelief in the face of such strong religious overtones. The more we make our presence known, she says, the better our chances of working together to turn around some of the disparities we face. We are not alone. Lovely.
Mine is actually coming along. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And there you go. And
Impressive stuff.
yes, own it.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. All righty. So I personally would like to start with talking about intersectionality with being trans and atheist and other things as well. In light of recent events at the ACA, Serafina, I would like to ask you if there's anything you would like to communicate or convey.
Oh, okay. So, all right, jumping right into this. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's
A
funny.
warm-up.
I'm like in the studio on the regular, but I've never been as nervous as I am right now here. So, yeah.
You're among friends.
Oh, shucks.
You surely are.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I'm just gonna assume that the viewers know about the background of what we're talking about, and if you don't, you can look it up at this point because it's all over the freaking internet. because I knew I was going to be nervous, I just wrote it down. So I'm going to read off my phone. I apologize for that. First, noting for the record that the opinions I share here are personal and do not necessarily represent those of the show or the ACA, et cetera, and so on. It seems like every day I see something new in the continuing saga of cisgendered people deciding whether or not they think that trans people, trans women in particular, should have their pronouns respected, or if shelters or medical providers or just any old providers really should be required to serve or treat us like everyone else, or if we should be able to play sports or use the fucking public toilet. Many of these cis people seem to be well-meaning. Many seem to be nice people. Many are even supportive in other areas. None of that undoes or excuses the harm that what they're doing causes. Public expressions of opinion influence the public opinion. The more viewership these expressions have, the more these people are recognized and respected, the more influence they have. And in turn, public opinion influences the way that trans people are treated and legislated against. But these are often good people who present these things, these opinions. I'm not talking about awful bigots here. I'm talking about ordinary good people who just happen to be in a privileged class and see no problem telling others how the marginalized class should be denied some access or resource. So when someone with a viewership of hundreds of thousands of people makes a video about whether trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports, when that video is misinformed in ways that could have been easily rectified by spending a little time talking with actual trans folk and expanding their research a bit, I'm not going to call that person a transphobe. Sure, basically parroted the talking points of transphobes, and sure, definitely inspired and emboldened plenty of transphobes, as a brief foray into any of the related Facebook groups in the past few weeks has made very clear. But I'm not going to call him a transphobe because I don't care if he is. I care about people's actions and their effects. Rationality Rules did something careless and harmful against a marginalized population. The ACA apologized for magnifying his voice. I heard that he would be issuing an apology video. At that point, I was happy. It's okay. Then came the relentless barrage of angry fans, free speech advocates, and actual, for real, serious, dyed-in-the-wool transphobes, which, despite commendable attempts at moderation for a while, made the ACA's online presence a frightening place to be for me. Somewhere in the middle of it all, he made a video where I didn't watch it, but the video, what am I thinking? The screenshot of it compared himself to freaking Galileo, and that was just what? But anyway, the eventual result was an official apology to him by the ACA, followed soon after by a change in moderation policy that has certainly made being online interesting, and the matter seems to have even influenced certain recent elections. To be clear, and again reiterating, this is my personal opinion, he didn't need or deserve an apology. I've seen that maybe he's learned a bit about trans medicine and perhaps about checking his facts better in that time, though maybe not much about checking his privilege. But whatever he may have learned, which I'm glad for, he learned at the expense of a lot of people who were already less privileged and struggling more than he was. For me personally, I'm sad about recent events. I'm sad about the people the ACA is losing. I'm sad that some people in spaces, both physically and online, where I once felt at home no longer feel truly safe for me.
Can I touch you?
Yeah.
Because I just...
And I'm sad because I'm reminded how very tenuous and conditional allyship can be. And I guess that's all I have to say about that.
I am personally sorry that you don't feel safe in those spaces, and I totally understand why. And I can't go to those spaces anymore either because I just can't. I get too angry. I don't feel unsafe, but I feel angry. And, when I'm confronted with people that are reaching out to me and saying, here's what's on your public space. It's been there 4 days. ACA hasn't addressed it. What are you going to do? And my thing is I can't defend this. I don't agree with that statement. It's ugly, it's bigoted, and I'm sorry that it's platformed, and that's why I can't represent anymore something that does not reflect. And like you said, it's a personal opinion, and it's I get this. My personal values are personal to me. Other people don't have to share them. But when you're speaking as a voice that is put forward as representation, you have to be able to defend the public who comes to you and says, why is this platformed at your page? And when I'm looking at comments on some of the boards that are reflective of our public presence, and I'm reading a quote about trans people where if you plugged in black, everybody would see it as racist.
Yeah.
And it's okay because it's trans people, right? And it's just, I look at that and I'm like, how does a person not see? And especially when you have people in an atheist community who are gathering to be away from a dominant culture of religious intrusion and oppression, who then turn to somebody like Sarah and people like Sarah and say, why do you need these safe spaces? And it is such a lack of self-awareness to understand that, you're in a safe space. That's what this is representing.
Exactly.
But you don't, and so for me, part of what's interesting, and I want to let people know, we had decided to do this panel on intersectionality before any of this stuff happened.
Right.
Like this was just
Yeah.
something we were going to do. I thought it was a good idea. I suggested it. People were like, yeah. But it's a lack of awareness of intersectionality.
Yeah.
And it's also like the privilege, right? So you've got this identity that is atheist, and compared to trans, it's just, marginalization and the negative bigoted backlash against the trans community. And like you said, it is especially trans women, because there are some
Exactly.
things about gender in our society that really demonize femininity and anything associated with that. So when you have like someone that society is trying to label as male or man, and they're in a role that society views as traditionally women and female, it is so much hate comes out of that.
Yeah.
Whereas there's this sort of, I'm not saying that there's not hate against trans men. What I'm saying is that it's not nearly the vitriol that you see aimed in the other direction. And I was actually, number one, I was informed of this a lot more from a trans male friend of mine.
Yeah.
And also two people recommended to me that I read Whipping Girl, which I'm reading now, and it's the same message. It's just, there's this specific hate for trans women that it's just not comparable.
Well, and I would also point out that this hatred of trans women intersects with race in a way that's particularly vile, because
And deadly.
because what's the count now in the last month? Is it like six?
Thought it was higher.
Six that I know of, trans women of color who've been murdered in the last month or so.
3 in Dallas, I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one was beaten in broad daylight in the street while people screamed
Right.
homophobic slurs of all things. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Right.
get your bigotry straight, I guess.
Yeah.
If you're going to hate people, at least know why you hate them.
Yeah. But, I mean, getting back to your point about people being unaware of their privilege, and I think there's this kind of feeling among a certain subset of atheists that, they've shed religious baggage, they've come out as atheists, and suddenly they understand the privileged position that Christianity in particular occupies in American society. And they're pushing back on that, and they see all the ways that non-believers are discriminated against. Yeah. And they think this is the worst thing ever. This is like the only kind of discrimination that's going on now. What more could there be? We've fixed all these other problems. Yeah. And it's kind of embodied in a comment that someone made in another venue. It's on social media. And I'll just read an excerpt of that. And it says, I just don't think that this space needs to be appropriated by activists for causes other than the promotion of positive atheist culture. LGBTQ activism isn't atheism. Although I consider myself an ally, there you go with the self-designation as an ally. There are atheists who clearly are not. That means that while they are often seen hand in hand, LGBTQ activism and humanism are not the same thing as atheism. So this is the guy who wants his atheism pure and unsullied by all of these other social concerns that actually are impacted by religion. And, he doesn't see any intersection between the oppressive, the oppression that other groups face and what he might personally experience.
Unless that oppression is being expressed against the community, then nobody stands up to say, how is this atheism?
Right.
Or at least very few people.
Yeah.
It only becomes, well, how is this atheism when somebody stands up in defense of a marginalized group? From what I see, it's like the ratio is huge.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're fine with people actually oppressing groups in the name of religion as long as they're not openly oppressing non-believers. At that point, that's a bridge too far. But, if you're screwing over women because, you're legislating abortion clinics out of existence or even impacting people's ability to get birth control or basic health care, that's no problem. If it's police beating black people to death in the street, well, that's not an issue for us, even though, there was science and, tradition and Christian morality that was behind Jim Crow.
Oh, I was introduced to a new acronym just this past week, which was BLDM, which is Black Lives Don't Matter.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, people are using that one now. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm so done with this. I can't. I just can't. Before I shut my mouth as like a person on a mountain of privilege, I just want to say that I want to talk just for a moment about the idea of identities and where they arise, right? So an identity can arise from something that is just a self-selected thing. So I'm Italian, I'm studying Italian, and I post about it sometimes online, and that's a choice, right? I can choose to look at my Italian heritage, that my grandparents immigrated here from Italy, and I can make a thing of that or not. No one cares. Right. It doesn't matter. But when I'm seeing legislation that is like going after rights for pregnant people and people that are targeting, what they view as women, and they are coming after me for an identity of woman, right? Then I don't really have a choice. So it's like if you're a Jew in 1940s Germany, you don't get to the luxury of saying, oh, I don't care if I'm a Jew. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like it matters a
Yes.
lot. And I think that's a good segue for getting Mandisa into this conversation. The idea of identities that are driven by society, and what does that mean to? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, thank you once again for having me on the show. I realize there may be like a 2 to 3 second delay for everyone in the studio and listeners. What people need to understand, especially about the Black identity, was that, and when it comes to race, that was a construct that came about during slavery, especially in the United States. So it was not one that the Black community actually, it's not that we just wanted to identify as Black or what have you. The construct of race actually came about and was imposed at least 1 or 2 centuries. So, and this was a way to distinguish who was free, etc. I mean, it was very, very, when it comes to the color lines, especially in the United States. And so to all of a sudden turn around and act as if it's our fault that we say that we identify and distinguish as Black or what have you, or to express some sort of nationalism in some way, especially as a means to try to fight others, as if we're the ones who did it. we're the ones who started this mess. And knowing the history has always been a point of speak. And when I whenever I am in a public, people need to know the origins, why they came about, and what we can do about it. And in this community, I agree with everything that has been said, that there are so many atheists who don't seem to think that these factors matter. Especially an atheist who does identify as pansexual. So I am definitely intersect, and I definitely equality. And to see people in the community don't think that these things matter, um, is very, very. But also, what I've seen on my end is people who talk the talk. Publicly they'll say that they're for social justice and diversity and inclusion and other people's rights, but then behind totally different, there's a totally different story. Um, they often become talking points that, unfortunately, when we see these actions and what you have described, definitely shows a lack of good actions, because I do think that this entire situation with the ACA really could have been handled much gently than anything else. Um, but especially on my end, and we see a lot of folks who will say the right things publicly, but then their actions say something totally different, either behind the scenes and sometimes publicly, which leads me to think that it really isn't that much of a concern as people say, um, and which can be very frustrating to say the least. And that also, of course, um, when it comes to the trans rights, when it comes to the rights of women and other marginalized groups, it really, we really have to ask ourselves the questions of, yes, because discrimination against atheists is absolutely important, but discrimination against anyone, and like you said, that is coming from a religious or privileged point of view, um, is a problem for all of us. And it isn't that we only care about the rights of our fellow atheists. We certainly care about the rights and of those who, are affected in general. And so for me, it's hard to understand why that is such an issue for folks. And also this idea that the marginalized people have to be the only ones educating themselves to the poor, privileged people who feel like they were attacked. I mean, certainly this is what we deal with within the Black community at large, the Black atheist community, and those who are racial justice and social justice activists in that space. We're always treated as if we're the ones who are starting this stuff, when that isn't the case at all. And again, it just is an uphill battle here that I know we're all dealing with. And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, thanks for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to hit your point about learning about other cultures or learning about other identities, because I think that's super important. There was a situation recently where we saw like a Native American who was involved in an altercation and got like kind of ugly at a protest with some some other people. And I've been doing a thing where I come out and I say I'm a racist, right? And then I explain to people what I've done or said that's racist, and how people brought it to my attention, and how I have now recognized that, why I understand it, what it is I did or said, and how I am not going to do that going forward, because my goal is to not be as racist as I can not be, right? Like I don't want to be racist. And so when somebody points out something to me that I'm doing, I'm appreciative that they're helping me understand it. I own that label. I am saying and doing racist things, then that's racist, and I'm a racist for that. And so if I don't want to be a racist, I need to stop doing those things. I need to alter it. But I also need to keep in mind that there's probably other things I'm doing that are racist that I'm not aware of yet, that I haven't said or done the wrong thing where somebody's called me out and said, hey, whoa, what did you just say? What did you just do, right? And this applies to any marginalized community. But when it came to that issue with the Native American, one thing I learned was that I was assigning motives that were incorrect based on my lack of knowledge about Native American culture and what the drumming represents. And when I learned it, it changed my perspective on the entire situation. And I basically came out and said, hey, I had a racist and xenophobic attitude here. This is why. The drumming is supposed to bring peace and bring calmness to a situation. That's what this person was trying to do. He even expressed it himself that was what he was trying to do. And as a result, not only did I ignore what he said about his own experience and what he was trying to do there, but I also spoke from a place of complete ignorance about his culture. And I was particularly ashamed because this is an indigenous people of this continent, right? So, I mean, that culture is the culture that was here when my ancestors came here, at least on my dad's side, right? And when I looked at that, I just, it's xenophobic to assign motives or to weigh in on something when you don't understand the culture that you're addressing or the community or the identity that you're talking about. It means that I think that I can just, say whatever about this group, and it doesn't really matter what's actually intended by that group or what the experience is of that group. And it's dismissive. It further marginalizes people, right? It erases their real experience. It's just wrong across the board. And so just to kind of bolster what you were saying, Mandisa, about we do have an obligation to learn about what's going on with communities, especially if we're going to open our mouths about them.
Yes, absolutely. Can everyone hear me and see me again?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. There is absolutely nothing. I have no problems, explaining what, especially as to my demographic. But what gets me is when I do discuss it and people just don't listen, or they just think, you don't know what you're talking about. And you wouldn't believe, especially recently at certain events, as if I just have no idea what I'm talking about whatsoever.
Yeah, there's always
maybe we should read your resume again.
Yeah.
Just
right?
out loud.
Well,
Right.
There's always the people that pop up with the yes, but, and they have some point that they think is valid that no one has ever considered. And
We've heard it. I promise.
I promise we've heard it.
And it's kind of, that's the thing. It's like atheists should understand this. Because how many times has a Christian come to us and said, but if you only understood this particular argument, you're like, okay, wait, let me check. Yeah, this is the 1,000th and 15th time someone has told me about Pascal's wager. It's the same for every marginalized community. They have heard it. And there's a reason why it's rejected and why it's wrong. And it's frustrating for them to have to. And that's the other thing to remember, right? While I may be saying something bigoted and someone's helping me understand it, someone like Sarah will come up to me and say, hey, this is probably not good because of these things. I'm getting this lesson for the first time. But Sarah's given it like a million times, right? So understand a little bit of the frustration that comes sometimes when you're confronted by somebody from a marginalized community who is just sick to death of having to explain this again and again and again to people who aren't making an effort to go and learn it themselves, like me, right? Like me, I get called out. And you just have to absorb that. Recognize you're the bigger dominant culture and that you can absorb a little bit of that frustration and that abuse because it's really minor compared to what they're dealing with and the frustration that's coming out of them toward you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and you talked about owning your racism.
Yeah.
And I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I admit I was infected with racism from birth. There's no way I can avoid acknowledging that, there are times when I have racist views. I may express racist attitudes. And I have to check that because if my goal is to not do harm and to actually be an ally to people, then I have to recognize that in myself and fix it.
Yeah.
Because the attitude, I can't get away from that. There's nothing I can do about that. What I can do is not do more harm.
Right. And racism doesn't always look like something obvious.
A white hood and a burning cross.
Right. It does not look like that. Because just recently,
If only.
Right. If that was simple. I was in a meeting and I trampled all over a person of color. And a friend called me out on it, and wow. Yeah, so still learning, and
So someone called you out on something that you did that was racist, and you're still standing. You didn't die.
no, I didn't.
Right.
no.
Wow.
But I feel
It can
Right.
can survive it.
yeah, I feel horrible though, and it's not. As a person who wants to not do harm, this is just
In what ways did it ruin your life
Yeah.
to be called
to
out.
be called out on your racism? Like, how did that destroy you?
It didn't. I'm one of those people who doesn't mind being wrong.
Okay.
A lot of people have problems with that, but I don't. I want to do better. And if I'm wrong, I want to know about it.
Okay.
Some folks will tell me I'm wrong and I disagree with them. And
So no bones broken.
no,
no loss.
no
of
pride
income,
loss.
No,
No,
yeah, okay.
no, I'm still
Just making
me.
sure.
I'm good. It just I felt horrible and did what I felt I could do to repair the thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's there.
But
Have
also,
to
wait a
acknowledge
minute.
it.
But you felt bad about it. Mm-hmm. Why?
I don't want to hurt anybody.
How does it hurt people when you do or say racist things?
Makes them less. God, putting up with an incessant barrage of something that says, "I don't see you." That's awful, and I don't want to be a part of that.
How does that feel, Mandisa, when people treat you like you're less?
Well, of course, to me, it's upsetting. It's infuriating.
Yeah.
But unfortunately,
kind
and
of
so
harm
not
does it-
surprising.
What kind of harm does that do to your community when people have that attitude?
Well, I wouldn't say that it causes immediate harm, but what it does is it does compel, it forces us to ban, and it unfortunately does put us on the defensive
Yeah.
because we don't feel like we should have to, be overspoken or ignored or disrespected.
Hmm.
And that's what happens when you do to oppress and marginalize people. We fight back.
Right.
Right.
And it is self-defense, right? I mean, it is defending yourself and defending your community. And I guess
Yes, it is.
And when there's a lot of people doing things, and it's pervasive in society that people look at you and say you're less, I think it does have impact. I mean, there is so much systemic racism that really impacts wealth distribution, that
Yes.
impacts educational opportunities, that impacts, the justice system is just
Healthcare
saturated.
healthcare delivery.
Access. I mean, it results
Yes.
in a lot of people not understanding what's going on and the actual harm that's happening. And I guess that was kind of where I was driving at, was the idea that this.
Well,
like-
yes.
Go ahead.
I mean, if we're talking about a simple interaction like Claire mentioned, then yes. But when we're talking about institutional factors like you mentioned,
Right.
it must go back to it. We must go back to the institution of slavery, where there were a group of people who were forced to build this country with no pay
Mhm.
and no credit and no recognition. And then once it ended, there was this extreme imbalance, to say the least, when it came to resources, access to education, and also when legislation basically disfranchised our.
Yep.
And so, yes, this does seep into the psyche
Right.
of people that they are, that they are less than. Then that there's no way that they are unworthy, and this does carry through generations, and you see it in other communities when it comes to the mindset, and unfortunately this is what religion has enforced. So yes, you do see it in the cycles of generations that have come about, and also from it.
Yeah.
And this is something that we definitely cannot ignore and continue or stop discussing, or continue to stop doing something about.
And part of perpetuating that is alerting people when they're unaware of things that they're doing that are racist, right? I mean, it's like the idea of saying you've got to be aware of it. If you don't start becoming more aware, then none of this is going to change, right? I mean, the Black community, what is it, like 10% of the population, is not going to change this by themselves. And if people don't start getting more aware of what's going on and how the attitude impacts the systems, because you're not going to change a system if you don't even know it's broken, right? And if you have a bunch of people that aren't in the situation on the shit end of that stick who are saying, I don't understand why it's a problem. Oh, well, it's not for you, right? It's not for me. And so what I'm trying to point out, I guess, is that the damage that Claire suffered from being made aware that she had made a racist statement is like
is nothing compared to the damage that has already been done. And that is why I said that it's unfortunately not surprising, because we're used to this. Unfortunately, we're used to dealing with these things from privileged white people or just privileged men or what have you.
And people misunderstand that term privilege, right? It doesn't mean that I'm sitting on a mountain of money. It just means I don't have to worry about being Black in the justice system, right? I mean, that's my privilege, okay? I don't have to think about it. But not having to think about it is no excuse for not thinking about it, is my point, right? And let's get Sarah back in here. You're looking at a situation where people are calling for segregation against you.
Sure, yeah.
You know, we're back to segregation.
Yeah.
And then when you try to talk about people, when you try to talk about it with people, when you try to inform people, you know, you're rolling the dice. Is this someone who's going to listen? Or is this someone who's going to get their back up? And it's really easy to get defensive about this sort of thing because you don't want to feel like you're hurting people, right? And you don't want to feel like you're the bad guy. And you do want to feel like the ideas that you already have about the world are correct. And unfortunately, they're not. and if you know, they are absolutely teeming with privilege. And you're just taking that as the universe as it is, when it's actually the universe as you're narrating to yourself.
And I'm seeing these same patterns, right? So we already went through this already with the can't use the same restroom, can't be on a sports team, can't be. I mean, we've done this. Are we going to have to do it every time with every demographic as they come up to say that, okay, you can't lock them out of these spaces?
I want to dovetail with something that you were talking about, Mandisa, about how you put up with this all the time and you respond. And then what happens, it happened quite a bit with what happened with the ACA. I had the term emotional thrown at me, tone policing. I was being too emotional.
Yes.
Speak about how fair that is. Or how...
Oh, gosh. Well, it is not. This idea that somehow, first of all, emotions are a bad thing.
Right.
Thank
you.
You know, that we aren't allowed to express what is wrong with us. And I tend to get this a lot being a leader in this community, that I have to, and you know, because I don't want to come across as I'm not supposed to come off as an angry Black woman.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that everyone could eventually be scared of. You know, that I have to watch my temperament, especially when something has been committed against me.
And that's, you know,
you're not
something
supposed
that's
to express that, or you're always supposed to be tempered when you do it, which is very, very unfair. And that just shouldn't be an expectation. Now, I do try to be measured in because I think that thinking about what you say before you say it is important, but that shouldn't always be on the person who it was committed against.
Right.
We should not be held responsible for how we react to it, especially when it was wrong.
Right. And I think that right now there's a lot of people in atheist communities who are calling for civility when dealing with, you know, issues in the community, especially issues that don't affect them. And I think that's one of the most corrosive things out there, is to insist that everyone remain calm and civil while we have this intellectual debate about people's right to exist and the people's right to go out and engage in public life. It is it's absolute bullshit.
And it's not just the right. It's that rights are denied and bad things are piled on
Right.
as well. It's not just that you have to go to a certain bathroom or whatever. Someone could beat the stuffings out of you for just being you, and
Yeah.
that's heinous.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if this were happening to the, white demographic in large numbers, the cisgender heterosexual white people out there in large numbers, we would declare the perpetrators terrorists, and there'd be some broad.
Well, we already we have that example in real time, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure Mandisa's aware of like violence in black communities, right, and gun violence, and it's like, but it hits mainly white people when it's like a mass shooting.
Yeah.
And so that's what sucks up the media
Right.
presence, right? I mean,
Right.
all of it's bad. Nobody needs to be shooting somebody to death. But the
Right.
fact is, if you looked at the numbers and how gun deaths and gun violence is proportionally, doled out, nobody seems to pay attention to it when it's happening in a black community. But when it happens
Right.
in all the victims you put up are white people, suddenly it's super important and it's a super big problem and we have to address this. And while I'm really glad that something got the impetus, moving,
Yeah.
I can't deny that something was it happened to white people.
Unless they're saying, what about black on black crime, in which
No,
case
don't.
they will
Don't.
happily trot that shit out.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Or if the perpetrator against said white people was black, then there'd be
Yeah.
a massive splash.
Yeah, or Muslim.
Right.
All
Well,
of a sudden
and
there would be a focus on the black community.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings up another issue, which since it is officially now Pride season,
Oh, yeah.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
I'm thinking back to the Pulse nightclub shooting. And so it turns out that the guy that did the shooting was Muslim. And so, there are certain right-wing individuals who decided to focus on the fact that he's Muslim instead of the fact that this was an act of anti-gay violence.
Right.
It killed a bunch of gay people. He wasn't out there to kill Christians or Jews or anything like that. He was there to kill gay people. But they're focusing on the fact that he's Muslim, and therefore, the anti-gay violence gets sidelined, so we can, encourage the racists and the xenophobes, because this Muslim guy did a terrorist act here.
I felt like, Sarah, you had a point you were going to raise, and then
I did? When?
You did earlier. You were starting to
never
say
have a point.
something, and then it didn't come out. But I just didn't. I wanted to give you an opportunity if you had something else to add.
Crikey, I
if
don't
that's
remember.
cool. No, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make
it's
sure.
gone.
Sorry.
Like moths.
So, something that happened during the ACA thing was there were trans folks who were upset by what the video said, and I agree. What the video said was pretty awful. And then there were trans folks who were like, it's not that bad. And I know, Mandisa, that the same thing happens in the black community. There are folks that see it, frankly, and then there are folks that are like, I don't think that that was an act of racism. So what do you do with that when folks in your own demographic,
Oh my
and
God.
as an ally, who do you listen to?
Yeah. Oh my God, you mean people aren't like that? They don't belong to like monolithic groups and all have this groupthink thing going on?
Exactly. Right. That's the thing. We
Yeah.
must. The one thing I went into when I got involved in this community, and especially when forming the organization, it came with the clear understanding that we weren't going to agree on everything. That I don't represent the entire Black atheist demographic. I don't represent the entire Black community. I don't represent the entire atheist or secular community. Do look to see is who is, I respect people where they can be as long as they are not outright hurting anyone. If they don't necessarily think that it's as according to their opinions, I mean, we can always have the discussion. We can try to understand why. And if they come up with a point that is reasonable, then I just say, okay, because we're not all going to hold the same passion about everything. However, sometimes see that some white folks do is that they say, "Oh, look at this Black person. Well, they don't think it's a problem. Let's spotlight them." And
Yeah.
it's like, no, don't do that because
Yeah.
you're further marginalizing us. Don't treat us as if, we do hold the same opinion. Community has never always agreed on everything. We are capable of our own thoughts. We are capable of our own actions. And that's okay. Just like the trans community, no one demographic is going to agree on everything. Now, if we're united on certain things, especially what our missions are about, then great. Now, the other stuff I think is up for discussion, is up for debate, and that is to be respected. So that is what I think we actually have to do something, so it doesn't have to be a all or nothing thing, or me or against me outright. There are some things that do need to be taken on a case by case basis and then re-examined and evaluated from there. It is okay to do that. What is not okay to do is outright be dismissive of anyone, no matter what their position is. It is good for us, and we can be emotional about it. It doesn't mean that we have to walk as enemies. And this is something that I know personally I've had to work on over the years, and I still work on it, because when things have a tendency to get contentious, I do internalize it. I do become sensitive to it, and I sometimes feel like, oh well, maybe I should walk away, or maybe they want to walk away from me if we engage. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, but working through it and talking it is going to be an important thing that we do when it comes to advancing these discussions and actions. And I think, and again, we're human beings. No one is perfect. And also understanding that, yeah, even though there are some people who may not have understood it before, and there is an obligation and opportunity for people to learn more. Understanding is good. Understanding is key, even if there isn't agreement. And something that we should take into consideration.
I have a thought on this, because I actually have thought about this for myself, right? Because I'm in a position, when you're a person who isn't in a lot of marginalized communities, you have to actually look at this and think, how do I think about it, right? So how do I think about it when somebody who's marginalized comes to me and says, this is not okay, and somebody else that's marginalized in that same group comes to me and says, no, I don't have a problem with it, or like, what? And I had a situation like that recently with the atheism, which was somebody, in a place where it wasn't supposed to come up, was raising what I consider to be a religious message, dominant culture message. And I was like, hey, this is not okay. This is supposed to be a religion-free zone. And so I brought it up and talked to some folks about it, and I had to address them kind of looking at it, well, not everybody thinks that that's a religious message. Well, but some people do. And if you go online, you'll see people saying, hey, this annoys me because I see it as pushing your religion. Other people were saying, it doesn't really bother me, right? Like secular people.
Yeah.
But to me, the question becomes, how much religious suppression do you want to, how close do you want to toe that line, right? So if I have people that are coming to me and they're Black people that I respect, and they're telling me this is a problem, and then I've got other people, Black people I respect, who are like, I kind of like this. I'm not, like I had that issue recently with Kamala Harris, right? Like, I'm kind of cool with her as a candidate, but I've heard people that I respect from the Black community, some of them are pretty supportive of her, and some of them have issues with her. And it's not up to me to tell the Black community how to feel about a candidate that is going to be representing everybody, including their community. So I don't get in that, right? They're telling me what they think, and that's what they think, and I don't tell them how to view it. But at the same time, I got to look at this, and it's like when an issue comes up, and it's like I know that it is a legitimate controversy even within that community. As the person on the outside, if my goal is to not further marginalize people, I don't do that or say that anymore. That's the end of it. They can sort out within their community whether or not they're going to be okay with it. But as a person that's outside that community, if I know that there's a significant number of people that have an issue with it, that see it as more marginalizing, that are offended by it, I'm going to say I'm erring on the side of caution with this, because I don't want to be an asshole.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Because every time someone from a privileged position will jump in with a negative opinion that they're going to send to the world about a marginalized group, it's like I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for them to drag out their friend, you know?
Who, interestingly, never seems to have a name.
Yeah, usually. Yeah, but and if it's someone who's, you know, really popular, then there's going to be, you know, actual people because, you know, we're not a monolith. There's going to be people who are going to be like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, okay, so now you've dragged these people out to show that you're right. And that's not the fucking point. Yeah, okay, so I disagree with this person. We can talk about it, her and me. You shut the fuck up and let us talk about it.
Right.
Yes.
And get on with your own fucking business.
Yeah, and just ask yourself, how close to transphobic do I want to get? How close to racist do I want to portray myself? And my answer to that is not at all, right? Not at all. I don't want anybody confused about whether or not I want to be racist or whether or not I want to be transphobic. No, I don't. I probably have things in me that represent that, but I don't want to be that. And so if there's like this legitimate question of whether or not this thing is transphobic or whether or not this thing is racist, my answer is that I'm hands off that thing. Get it away from me. I don't want it near me. I don't want people confused.
There are times when silence is golden, and it is okay to utilize it. Whether you're just sitting back and listening, you don't always have to. I said this sometime last year. White folks, especially cis white folks, do not have to have an opinion or to be the spokesperson, the spokespersons for everything and everybody. You can sit back and shut up.
Yes.
And but for some people,
that's what I learned the most.
Just feel like they just, right. It's like for some people, they just feel like they absolutely have to say something all the time, and that's when they put their foot in their mouths. You know, it is okay for you to just sit back and listen, and even, like I said, even if you don't agree with it, you can try to understand it, and at least try to learn something. You know, that's the main thing. But you know, some people, they just always have to, you know, they're responding not because, you know, they don't listen to understand, they're listening just to respond, and that's an unfortunate habit of people in general, but especially those who don't understand what marginalized folks go through.
Yes. And I mean, kind of circling back to the whole rationality rules thing. So again, it's okay for cisgender white boys to not have an opinion on things. And especially when I see a bunch of guys who I would be willing to bet that most of them can't name more than a handful, if that, of female professional athletes that they routinely follow. But suddenly they are so concerned about fairness to cisgender women in sports to the point where they have to attack other women. And it's like, okay, do not pit women against each other.
Right.
We do not appreciate that.
Right.
But it's about fairness in gaming journalism. I mean, in sports.
And so, I mean, and one of them, another guy, he comments here that, in my opinion, some sports shouldn't allow transgender people to compete, mainly the physical contact sports such as boxing, MMA, etc. They shouldn't be allowed in the same ring as female fighters. They have an unfair advantage with their natural strength and higher bone density. It's dangerous. Okay, and then he goes on to talk about somebody that got their skull broken.
Yeah, Fox did that.
Yeah. So, okay. I compete in a martial art, and I regularly spar men. I'm active in the atheist community. If someone had a concern about women competing with men, and they wanted to find out some information about that, you could actually have reached out to me and I'd talk to you about it.
You mean no one's reached out concerned that you're fighting with men?
No one's actually talked to me about, their concerns for my safety because I spar men. And I'm not talking about trans women, because I know there's a lot of people out there misgendering trans women. I'm not talking about sparring trans women. I might have sparred trans women in competition before, I don't know. If I did, it didn't matter. But I regularly spar men. Sometimes I get injured. And frankly, the people that injure me the most are not fellow black belts. They tend to be color belts.
Less control, less understanding of the
Yeah.
sport. Yeah.
And so it's really a non-issue. And if you're that concerned about women in sport, why don't you fucking talk to some of us? You know?
Or run for the board of an agency that makes decisions on sports,
Right.
When then your opinion would actually matter.
But you'd have to actually have some expertise probably to do that.
I want to back it up even more. One of the things that I don't know that anybody besides myself involved in the whole ACA kerfuffle actually reached out to as many endocrinologists as I could get my hands on, or get on the phone. The Peeples, Planned Parenthood, the University of Texas has a very large and strong women's and gender studies thing, and I wanted to talk to somebody who actually knew. That's what Tracie talks about all the time. Find somebody who actually knows.
Yeah.
And since I'm an academician, that's what I'm going to do anyway. Unfortunately, nobody got back to me in time. But your opinion does not matter if you don't know about it.
Yeah, I
You
posted,
just
I
are not
posted
in the arena.
recently
you
to
have no
just
idea.
say, nobody has come banging on my door saying, as an atheist, we need you to make a decision on, women's sports and
Right.
whether or not we allow trans people to compete. And literally nobody's asked. There's been no sports
Yeah.
authority coming and saying, as an atheist, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
And because we can't really make a determination until you guys decide, what's right here. Our
Yeah.
opinions could not be less relevant.
Right.
Completely.
Seriously.
Unless you're an endocrinologist or an academician studying these things, you don't know anything. And the things that are published online, here's why I wanted to go to an actual expert. The publication process is a very long process. You have to do the study, and it takes as long as 4 years just to write the study up. And then you submit it to a journal, and then maybe it gets published within a year. So everything you see in a scientific journal is 5 years old. It's 5 years old information probably. And then it gets into the lay literature, and that's further down the pike.
Yeah.
So the people who are saying, oh, it's the jury's out, I'm like, yeah, the meta studies say that the jury's kind of out. That doesn't mean that's all we know. You need to go to the source.
I guess I look at it like with this quote you were reading, right? There's, as far as I know, they're not testing bone density to make levels in MMA or something, are they?
No, they're not.
So then if a woman wants to compete and they're saying, whoa, this woman has better bone density or something,
Right.
it's like, okay, that's just a fact. I mean,
Right.
it apparently, how
Good
is
for
this?
her.
How is this a disqualifier? Has anybody been testing? Is this a metric they use to tell whether or not women can fight in MMA? And if they don't, then what is the problem here?
Well, yeah, and the thing is, it's like, okay, what if we discover that there's like a racial component to bone density? Do we now have racial categories for, certain sports because people with higher bone densities will have an advantage? Or I mean,
There
this
was
is so
actually
bizarre.
a clip that was run of a white, I'm going to say girl because I think they were high school age, right? So it's
Yeah.
a white girl who lost the race, and there were 2 trans women that came in first and second, and she was 8th, and apparently the 1 through 6 slot gets benefits, exposure and stuff. There was a time not long ago where those 2 women who won that race, 1 and 2, would have been a kerfuffle because they were also black.
Yeah.
So there was a time where that little white girl would have been up there crying, and people would have been saying, oh, this poor little girl lost out on scholarships because those black women
Yeah.
were allowed to race against her.
They stole
and
her scholarship.
They had to integrate the sports, and
Yes.
now, and I mean, that same discussion would have happened 50 years ago?
Yeah.
Or probably more at this point. I'm getting older and I don't like to acknowledge it, but it's like there's this idea somehow that this group that you're segregating, now that you've let them in, or now that you're not segregating them anymore, they don't belong there, they don't deserve it, and they are taking away something from the class that has owned it, that has kept them out. And that was so disturbing to me, to see that and to see those 2 women and recognize they're also black, and we would have seen the same thing
Yes.
before about their race. And today it's because they're trans. And, I'm like, if they run better and they're women and this is a woman's sports, then what is the problem?
Well, and that kind of brings me to,
And I don't even know they do run better. Did they break a record? I don't think so.
I don't know. Higher testosterone levels are only known to benefit certain sports.
Yeah.
And there are other sports that it's kind of unknown. So if a woman has a naturally higher than normal testosterone production, it probably doesn't help, except if she's in some very specific sports.
But even if it does, it's like if you have higher testosterone, good for you. You're going to do better.
Yeah, it's not like you're, taking performance-enhancing
The whole
drugs.
thing is about how do we strip somebody from the
Right.
identity woman.
Well, and the
This
thing
is
about
what
it
it's
is,
coming down to. She's not woman enough. She's got too high testosterone. She's not woman enough. She's got like a weird chromosomal configuration. She's not woman. This is not a woman. Not a woman. Not a woman. Right?
well,
I mean, that's what.
and
it
the thing is, we can't ignore the intersection of so many different things because, like in the Castor Semenya case, she's not only, winning these races by a lot, but the thing that got people's attention is that we can't ignore the fact that she's black.
Oh, yeah.
That was a factor. The other thing is that she's a butch lesbian. And so that is the thing that caused people to say, okay, hey, what's going on here? And that's another little intersection thing that actually affects me because when you start defining who's a real woman, who's woman enough,
Right.
there aren't a lot of trans women competing in sports.
No.
But there are a lot of women.
Right.
A lot of lesbians. And it's most often cisgender lesbians who bear the brunt of these kinds of things because some, cisgender, heterosexual,
Yeah.
well,
I mean, that's the
finisher
thing,
comes
right?
up and says, I don't think you're woman enough to be in my race.
That's the trope, right? You just want to be
Yeah.
a man.
yeah,
You just want to be a man.
Exactly.
Yeah, if she were a femme heterosexual white girl, no one would have ever tested any of
Right.
this.
No one. And the thing about it is, the story with Castor Semenya is that she might be intersex, so she might be an XY woman.
Yeah.
We don't know.
She
She's
didn't
never-
know either.
Yeah,
Right?
she didn't
I
know
mean,
either. She was born a woman. She was raised a woman.
Yeah.
She's always identified as a woman, and she's also a lesbian, and she's very fast. And no one knew. But the thing is, there are women who are XY who are extremely feminine because
yeah.
they do not respond to testosterone. And so there was no way they were ever going to develop any kind of, male anatomy or anything. And the thing is, they have no advantage over anyone. But if we decide that it's chromosomes, then they get excluded from women's sports.
It's just looking for ways.
And if we decide it's testosterone, women get excluded from sports. And if it's
a genital configuration,
if it's your genital configuration,
if it's
you get
whether or not
excluded.
you can. Somebody else posted like a thing on male and female that had to do with your your contribution to actual conception.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Which means that anybody that can't conceive, so I used to be apparently a woman or a female, and
But now you're not.
now I'm not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and so there are all these definitions and all these ways to exclude. And you can just take your pick, but when you do take that pick, you're going to exclude a lot of other women.
Yeah. And there's no consistency because they're not doing it because of
Right.
of those reasons. They're
Right.
doing it to exclude people.
Yeah, can we find what's up with this woman and why she is so fast, and then let's blame that and kick her out of the sport.
But of course, we're being divisive because we bring up the fact that they're not being divisive by excluding people at all.
Yeah. Serafina, I know you don't speak for all trans women. I'm real
goodness.
clear on that. But there's a lot, we've talked a lot about what makes a woman, and you probably have a very clear notion of what that is. Can you tell me what it is for you? I mean, just even if it just comes from the heart.
Sure. For me, my experience was that over time growing up, there was something that I could not keep pushed down for long. That just told me very clearly that my gender was female. and that unless I found a way to socialize that way and be seen that way and see myself that way, that I was going to have to be done and just end it. And there was just no choice eventually, but those two choices. So there is, in my experience, a strong internal sense of gender. And, for some people it's very clear and strong. For some people it's very, blurry. For some people it shifts around. For me, it was very firm in a category that I was not assigned when I was born.
Yeah.
And it was irresistible eventually.
How old were you when you realized that?
Which time? Because, I was growing up. My earliest memory. So my earliest memory is more about realizing that feminine things were verboten. Which
it's a shame.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was when I was, sometime early elementary school. We were still playing on playground, so it must have been fairly early. I was playing Barbies with just a neighbor kid, and there's nothing inherently fucking womanly about playing with Barbies, but just when my neighbor mentioned it on the playground, that I knew for sure that any expression of even femininity at all had to be restrained and pushed down. And from that time on, any time that I had a thought even related to that, it was squish it down, because it can't be. And so it wasn't. Gosh, I think it was in my teens that I started to do what I called cross-dressing at the time, and it was like, this is amazing, but now it's done, and then just like it just was more frequent, because it just couldn't. It was building up pressure basically, and so finally it was when was it? It was 2002, I guess, that it could not be contained anymore. And I was just like, I have to admit, I've known for a few years, but not admitted, that I'm definitely a woman and can't, and now I know that I'm a woman and can't pretend not to be, because otherwise I will put a gun to my head.
Yeah. And that's an important thing, too. I learned, and I still learn, I learn a lot from my trans friends online. I read their posts, I read those threads, and it's an eye-opener, and has made me question lots of things that I thought I understood. One of the things that I've learned is how vulnerable that community is to self-harm, and you have got to tread lightly. Yeah. Because these are people who have lived in incredibly oppressive circumstances and are being incredibly brave to come out. And some of the things that they talk about, like total fear of just, I went into the bathroom today that is part of my gender, and I can't believe I did that. And this might sound like it's nothing to you, but it was huge to me. Yes. And I'm like, no, it's huge. Believe me, because if somebody paid me money to go into the men's room, I would say no. I wouldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't, I would be so uncomfortable going in there knowing that everybody around me thinks that this is inappropriate on that level. And it's just pure peer pressure. But I mean, and it's also dangerous though for them. I mean, and when you've got 3 people murdered in Dallas and one, like I said, this is, you can't just blame this on one messed up individual when one of those people was beaten in broad daylight by a mob screaming crap at them that made it really clear why they were being beaten and why people thought it was okay. I mean, this is a group thing that people did. Nobody stopped it. It's disturbing. But yeah, this one of the things that I heard recently was somebody say, well, what are you just going, because you're just going on this because it's like a feeling? And I'm like, what the hell do you think sexual orientation is? Yeah. Right? I mean, when you say you're straight, is that just a feeling? Yeah. Right? Yeah, it kind of is, right? It's like how I'm oriented. How do I know I'm really attracted to men sexually? How do I know? Is it just a feeling? Yeah, it is. Come on. I mean, there was a time not long ago when we just assumed that if you were born with a penis, you were attracted to somebody who was born with a vagina, and that was just the end of it, right? And there are still people today who will argue that gay doesn't exist. You're just out to sin and be satanic, right? Like and they just think everybody actually is straight, and that you're just going through a phase, or you're just and it's
Or tempted by the devil.
Yeah, and bi people express this too a lot, right? Like bisexual people are just like, no one wants to believe them. Oh, you're gay and you just don't want to admit it. It's like, no, they're really bi. Like, believe them when they tell you who they're attracted to. They know better than you.
Yeah. My wife is bisexual. So we've been together for almost 19 years. Okay. She's still bisexual.
Yeah.
It didn't change.
That's a long phase. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, God. Just like I have a friend that's bisexual, and she ultimately got married to a guy, and so her family was just like, "Oh, good, you sorted that out."
Good God. Oh,
No,
good God.
she's still bisexual, and didn't change. She just married somebody. She could have married a woman, and it would, But yeah, that whole thing, it's just a feeling. Well, yeah, and in fact, if you were looked at socially as somebody who didn't align, you'd be more aware of why that feeling's important, right?
Yeah.
And how it is just a feeling.
Yeah.
So I've brought this issue of National Geographic up before, and I'm going to bring it up again. If you can get your hands on it, it explains so much about gender. It's beautifully written, and it's January 2017. Every person I've handed it to has changed their minds about what gender is. And just to confirm what you're talking about, Serafina, the XY chromosome, that is a physical thing, and that's there. The next thing that can happen is your genitals. And the genitals don't necessarily match the XY chromosome depending on what's going on with a lot of things. So that's next. They are two separate things. So when they talk about a biological woman, I'm like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got XY maybe, and then somebody who has female genitalia. And then later on, your identity is determined. It is a different thing. And then your orientation is determined. And that is another thing altogether. These are all disjointed. They are not one big blob. They develop at different times during human development. In utero, it's a real thing. Yeah. And so that feeling is legitimate and should be honored.
There's so many parallels to homosexuality in the way that society is morphing, right? So it's like you have the trans segregation in the military, where they're saying like, oh, you can't be in the military. It's the same exact. It's like, here we are having this argument again, right? Like we're doing this all over again. And also, I was really glad because I think it's the American Anthropological Association came out and basically said, hey. And they were responding to a Trump administration policies that were anti-trans, and they were just like, this is unconscionable because transsexuality is a historical fact. Yes. It is a global fact. It is an intercultural fact. This is existed in societies, and it is a human experience. Which again, it was like that was the argument that swayed a lot of people about gay. Right? It was just like because there's gay people everywhere and there are trans people everywhere. Yeah. It's not like this. It's a new thing that just happened. Like in the last 20 years.
It doesn't go away because you push it underground.
Yeah, you can't suppress it. Asking people to suppress it creates, what Sarah was describing, it creates psychological harm and physical harm, right?
Well, and I mean, one of the arguments in favor of don't ask, don't tell, yes. Early in the 90s when that first came into being, was that this was actually a benefit to the gay community. It protected gay people because if they were allowed to serve openly, they'd be targeted and killed by straight service members.
That's all kinds of messed up.
It is messed up, and it was wrong. First of all, it's messed up because that's a very low opinion of most service members.
Right.
Okay. The second thing is that it was factually incorrect because in the entire history of military bans on gay people, not a single gay person was murdered because they were gay. Okay. All the gay people who were murdered in the military were closeted. And they were closeted because they had to be. But there were a few people in the military who were allowed to serve as openly gay. And that was actually prior to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy actually removed a lot of the commander's discretion for not discharging people. If the commander determined that that person's presence in the unit was necessary, for the unit's mission, they could make an exception and allow the person to continue to serve. Once Don't Ask, Don't Tell came into effect, that removed that discretion. But there have been a few people who were openly gay and remained in the military. They weren't killed.
How about that?
People who were out didn't get murdered. And since Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been lifted, we haven't had this epidemic of, gay people getting murdered. Same thing with trans people.
It's just I just can't. It just bothers me so much that segregation is happening again.
Well, and the thing about it is that there was a time long ago we seem to have forgotten that the military was segregated by race.
Yes,
There were.
Yes,
There were
we just keep having the same
all black.
We keep learning the same lesson
battalions.
and still not learning it.
Right. And part of the reason they segregated the military at the time was that, it would be dangerous for black people to serve with white people. That was one of the things, or that white people don't want to serve with black people or whatever. And then at some point, the military said, you know what, screw it, we're going to integrate the military. And, I won't say it was a non-event, because there were some growing pains associated with that, and it wasn't painless, but the military got through that, and we were better for it. And what's interesting is that there's some people that say that the integration of the military was actually one of the things that fueled some of the events of the civil rights era, because people who had served with, an integrated unit in the Army, they were unwilling to accept segregation at the lunch counter off post. And maybe Mandisa could speak to some of that as well.
I'm pretty sure that's probably factually correct. There was a lot of desegregation when it came to the military that I think did propel. And unfortunately, though, even with the desegregation of the military, you have black soldiers who still face other problems when they got home.
Yeah.
And especially black soldiers who lived and traveled through the South.
Yes.
Back during that time. Of course, in any type of movement where there is significant change, there is significant resistance, and that wasn't any different.
Yeah.
But I can just say definitely overall, I'm the one who has to speak on this, but I think there's also this idea that if you segregate, the idea of segregation is that black folks maybe aren't either capable of doing things that white folks could. For example, they certainly didn't think that black soldiers couldn't rise to the ranks of, or couldn't compete with or fight alongside or do extraordinary things, like for example the Tuskegee Airmen, who made significant War II. There's this idea that somehow we're still, when we talked about science, and we pride ourselves on science education and the method, but certainly that method has had racist elements. And there has been some bad science over the years, especially to black folks and our inferiority. And I say that in air quotes.
Yes.
So that's also a fear that perhaps when we're given this power, when we're given equity and equality, we're going to take it and do exactly what was done to us. And so there's that also that could also add to the resistance part, make it sound or even emotionally sound, because really all we was were those opportunities that hadn't been afforded to us before and that actually were denied. But it's just very interesting what factors come into play. And some may be even on the parts of those who say they are for. Okay, I'm
Okay.
I don't think,
that
we
last
heard the
sentence
last
cut off.
sentence.
Yeah.
We didn't hear the last
You said
sentence.
those who are for, and then it kind of quit.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Yeah. Things like casual racism, implicit bias, implicit racism, and microaggressions. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I love what you said about science, and it's like, yet this is a part of our culture, and it's not immune to the same bullshit that the rest of our culture is
Exactly,
immune
and the
to.
sexism as well. And again, the same thing happening. We're seeing it all over again, right? So homosexuality was removed from the DSM, and now who is removing, I guess, some diagnoses that are related to being trans is coming out of some
World Health
diagnostic-
Organization has removed it. Yeah.
And so we're seeing it slowly destigmatized because science is impacted by social biases just like every other field. Now, it is worthy that they try not to be, right? That they try to be objective. And like, I love the fact, as we're always saying, that they are self-correcting. And they do self-correct because we keep seeing it, and it keeps self-correcting the same way, right? Over and over again, we're just going to keep playing this song because people aren't going to get it.
Well, and I like that you brought up that, science was actually what got homosexuality removed from the DSM. And since it's Pride Month, a little bit of history here. So historically, homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder. And it was because of the work of a scientist named Evelyn Hooker in the early 60s that studied both homosexual men and heterosexual men on various factors and basically studied their psychological adjustment. What she determined was that there's really no difference. That basically the homosexual men who were okay with their sexuality, who basically had not absorbed all these negative messages, which was hard to do back then. But, she found a sample of, a representative sample and compared those to heterosexual men who were similarly situated.
Yep.
And she published this work, and it was groundbreaking for the medical community because the medical community was convinced that this was a disorder and that you had to treat this and fix it, right? And so Hooker comes in and says, no, it's actually not a problem for these guys. It's just like how they are. And so that was I think that was published in 1962 or something like that. And it wasn't until 1974, I think, that homosexuality was removed from the DSM as a disorder. So it took 12 years for everything to kind of catch up. But eventually it did. And even after that, and to this day, there are still proponents of conversion therapy who think that this is a disorder, that it can be fixed and it should be fixed. And, and the harm that does is it's almost impossible to describe the kind of harm that this does to people. And I have this view on this, that these people know that conversion therapy doesn't work. Even the proponents of it, they know it doesn't work. You can't make somebody straight if they're gay. And that's not the point. The point of conversion therapy is to punish people for being gay.
To marginalize them.
Yes.
Yeah, because oppression is violence.
And and what this causes, especially in gay kids and trans kids and non-binary kids or anybody that doesn't fit this narrow definition of how you're supposed to be, what it does is it internalizes the self-loathing.
Yeah.
And it causes
Extreme
them to
shame.
Yeah, it causes them to kill themselves.
And that's the thing, right? So there's a difference. There is a difference in marginalized communities. Some communities, like Mandisa's community, most folks that are identifying as Black, they can't be not out.
Right.
right? Like you got to be out if you're black, right? But
Right.
when you're gay or you're trans, you have this like thing where you can be not out. And like what Sarah was describing, when you learn early on that you need to hide this from people,
Yeah.
then you start hiding it from people so that you don't get in trouble and you don't feel ashamed and you don't whatever. And so then when people see that, right? Like I see so many people that are focusing on, like the genital surgeries. And they seem to have this idea that you're transitioning from a man to a woman. And it's like, no, Sarah's a woman. Sarah was a woman from as far back as she can remember. And she no more transitioned to a woman from a man than a gay person in the closet transitioned from straight to gay, right?
Right.
I mean, they didn't become gay at some point.
Right.
And, now what's interesting is I know people who now identify as gay who were convinced that they were straight, but something was wrong with them. Like they just thought like I just thought I was straight and I didn't like sex. Now I know I'm gay and I'm with my same-sex partners and sex is awesome, right? And so you can repress this so much that a person even will say that, I identified this way. And it is possible for orientations to change and even for gender identities to change like throughout a person's life. And this can happen. But the point is all of this stuff, like when you make a person hide and lie about what they are, and then later it comes out, don't assume that they like turned into something different.
Right.
Right. A lot of times they just now can be honest.
Yeah. We're just about to the end, but we can go over. But I want to ask the most obvious question of both of you, Mandisa and Sarah. What can allies do better? I know that's a giant question, but a lot of people want to do better. What can we do better? I mean, I'm saying that like I'm an ally. What can people who are trying to be allies? I'm not using the best words.
What do you consider an ally? What's a good
Well, I
ally?
would say, right. A good ally will first let those who are marginalized determine whether they're a good ally, especially by their actions. A good ally will listen and not just listen, but correct their actions and not just wait for the marginalized groups to, offer that correction. Once they get the information and they have evaluated, then they actively take steps to help the marginalized individual or community. And that can be in the way of support in various ways. That could be financial, that could be with resources, and that could be not just overburdening with certain questions, but if you have questions and if there are any concerns, then you bring them before you speak. You think before you speak, and also give that person the platform to speak before you speak on their behalf. So there are a number of things that good allies should be doing. And that's the most important part of it, making sure that they are staying the ally, knowing that they are in a support capacity and not over talking the person that they are that they're supporting.
Yeah, and I've been watching and reading a lot of Brene Brown's work lately. She's the person who studies shame and courage and vulnerability and a lot of other things that, excuse me, are qualitative and difficult to study, but she's found trends and she really knows how to frame things so that it's useful for everyone. And one of the things that I just read in one of her books that I really love is compassion can only happen between equals. So if I think I'm helping you up, that's not compassion. That's white savior bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. It's actually condescension too. It's very condescending.
Yes. So if you are acting in good faith, it's compassion if you are equals, if you behave that way. Otherwise, rethink what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that was from Brene Brown. That's not me. So, Serafina.
Yeah. To me, the moment that you are using ally as an identity rather than as a motivator, you are stepping away from being an ally.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, and it's a short step once you've turned in that direction to using it as a defense instead of a motivator. So being aware of that is I think the first most important step. And beyond that, just instead of taking the microphone, being a microphone, being an amplifier for the voices of the people that you want to support. Instead of making it about you, because the moment that you're using your own opinions instead of amplifying theirs, that's the moment you're making it about you, and you're not. It's again, you're making it just a part of your identity, and it's not about them anymore.
Yep. Good stuff. Anything else?
Not for me. I just want to thank our guests.
Yeah,
Thanks,
amazing.
Sarah,
Yeah,
and
this
thank you
is-
for Mandisa as always.
Yes.
Love
Yes.
having her on.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. It occurred to me that Sarah's been on before when she gave her book report.
Oh,
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
absolutely.
On the
Yeah.
phone, right?
That was a good episode.
It was fun.
Yeah. So I want to thank my co-hosts, whom I forgot to introduce at the beginning, as well as myself. So there was no, So I'm Clare Wuellner, and Jen Peeples is over there,
Hey,
and
everybody.
Tracie Harris over there, and
They can fix it in post. They'll put it in the front.
right there you go.
Yeah.
It's us, and it says down at the bottom of the screen. And I want to thank all of you, co-hosts and guests. This has been a really important and healing show for me, given recent events, and I thank you for that. I also want to thank the folks on the other side of the wall over there who
Yes.
make all this happen. My goodness, the technology that it takes to make this thing look good is astonishing. We all just sit back and they run around like crazy people trying to fix everything up.
They're amazing.
Thank you to Mark and Vern and anybody else who's over there that I don't know about, whom I don't know about. So I would like to leave you all with one final thought, and that is, we don't need a savior. We've got each other. It's all we've ever had and all we'll ever need. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.